So we're going to start the demo tonight, and I'm Dave Swiger. I'm the president of the Mid-Maryland Woodturners Club. And the first thing I'm going to confess to all of you is I'm no sharpening expert. And I'm not so sure there is such a thing as a sharpening expert. It's another one of those things in wood turning where everybody's doing something a little different. However, I think there are some general guidelines that can be followed, and that's basically what I'm going to sort of discuss tonight. And I'm going to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the three different grinders we have here. So the first grinder I'm going to use, and this is what I started with, I got a TORMEK. They're rather expensive. I think I've probably got $750 plus into my system, easily that much. Then we're going to talk about grinders with stone wheels, all right? And we're going to talk about the new CBN wheels that are out. Now back to the TORMEK. I have a love-hate relationship with this thing. And basically the reason for that is it has one stone on it. Now, the one thing I like, it's a slow turning stone, and it's a water cooled wet stone. And so you won't overheat your tools when you're grinding. It's impossible to overheat a tool while you're grinding on this. And what you do is you can vary the grit on this grinding wheel with this block that they give you. So I think one side you grind, you get 80 grit, and Nick, is the other 1,000?
I don't know what the
So I forget what the numbers are. I've got to where I only use the coarse side. I think the coarse side's all you need to do when you sharpen. All right? Unless you're one of those guys that really want a highly polished edge on your tools, the coarse works, and you just hold it and you press down on the wheel, and that sets your grit for you. All right. Now, as I said, we're going to do ball and spindle gouges tonight. And this is where I love this machine. You get this fancy little jig. You get a book that explains it all. All right. Actually, I got several books that came up with mine on how to set this jig. But essentially, I'll try to hold this up so it'll show up on the camera. There's an index here along this joint in the jig. And so it goes from 0 to 5. And in the book, they tell you where to set this. They refer to this to as the JS angle. And how they came up with JS, I don't know off the top of my head. And then you slide your tool in. Now, when you sharpen, if you could remove the handle off your tool, please do so. Because the handles just really get in the way when you sharpen. And these are Michael Hoslick designed these handles. And I really like these handles. If you're looking for a handle recommendation, this is a great handle. And it comes with this really nice jig. So what you do, you take this jig, and this is a detailed gouge that I use for spindle turning. All right, and I'll pass this around so you can all take a look at this grind. But This jig lets you set the protrusion from the jig. So you can catch that on your arm?
Yeah.
All right. And you just set it like that. Now, the other thing you need to do is set this arm the right distance from the wheel. And in this case, I'm going to be using this front hole. And what you do is you just bring this jig down and adjust the depth of this arm right here. You just loosen these two thumb screws to where both of these metallic wheels just touch the wheel. So it's pretty simple to set up. And once you have it set up, you just slip the jig on, turn the machine on, and when you sharpen, you just do a nice rotation. Now, one place people make a big mistake when they sharpen is, and I don't really want to do it, I'll lift it off. They'll get on the side, and before they go to rotate over on the nose of the grind, they'll stop. And when you stop, if you hesitate there just for a second or two, you'll end up getting what's called a bird's beak in your grind. You'll have a little indentation. Now, there's no bird's beak here on this grind, but that's what happens. And you really don't want a bird's beak, because a bird's beak will grab the wood. That's when you're going to experience your catches. All right? And also, when you do a grind, and let me grab a bigger bowl gouge here. Hopefully this will show up better. All right? So there's no bird's beak in this grind, but what you're trying to accomplish is you want to grind such that you are following the natural flute in your gouge. So you will see that there is a nice arc coming up on that grind. You see that? Now you can also get wings. You can get a high spot, and you really don't want a high spot. But it's better to have a high spot than a low spot. And also, if you end up with a straight grind, well, that's not the end of the world. You can cut fairly well with a straight grind. But ideally, you want this to be just a nice, gentle arc up to the back of the wing. Is there any questions about that?
What angle is that?
All right, this happens to be ground at 60 degrees. This tool here, I took a class with Michael Huslick, Gene Wall, and I, and this was Michael's grind on this particular tool. And it's rather interesting. It's 35 degrees. All right, now on spindle gouges, typically you're looking for a 40-degree angle. But if you don't get exactly, if you're 38 degrees or you're 42 degrees, don't sweat it. When it comes to angles on your tools, close is good enough. You can pretend you're playing horseshoes when you're grinding angles on your tools, on your bowl gouges and stuff. They're general guidelines, all right? So, and that's all the more, I mean, on this tool here, once you have got, on this grinder, once you have got everything set, it's really just as quick as this. And that tool's resharpened. Now, you can come over and strop your tools if you want, and you know, they have a nice honing compound to put on, and you can like I said, you could polish this up to it's a mirror if you want. Will it cut any better? I don't think you're going to really notice a difference, to be frankly honest. I can't tell a difference myself, because I have done that. I have polished some of my tools up to where they are mirrors. and then just use this coarse grind, I can't tell a difference personally.
Dave, even on a finished slice cut of your patient?
Nope. And I'll talk to that in a minute as to why, because when I do a finish cut on my poles, and the guys that were there Saturday morning when I turned this at the festival, if you remember, I used a shear cut. All right? And when you're shear cutting, you've got the edge of the tool, well, grab. Pretend this is a lathe. So when you do a shear cut, you're holding the tool way down here. And you're just cutting on this sharp edge. You are taking the finest little cut on the outside of the bowl. And when I started sanding on this piece, there was literally no tear out. I had no tear out. Now, I'll admit, this is a bit soft. This is a piece of box elder maple. But I had no tear out in the end grain as it comes around. So it's just developing technique. Do I always turn pieces without tear out? No, I do not. There's a lot of woods I get tear out in. So I have to do my fair share of sanding also.
Okay, I have a question.
Yep,
Does the
sure.
tear out have any relationship to how sharp the tool is?
Oh, yeah.
In other words, as
Yes,
you're cutting,
there
you
is a
think you're okay.
there is a relationship to the amount of tear out you get and how sharp your tool is. Especially if you're a person that's using scrapers, right? When the burr on a scraper only lasts about 45 seconds. Do you realize that? That's not very long, right? So that first burr you get on the scraper, and I happen to bring my big scraper tonight, and I ground this right before I came in, and I'll pass this around, but don't wipe your finger across the top, but if you run it across the top, you'll feel the burr on there. All right, I want to pass that around. It is that burr that's doing the fine cutting, and then when that burr's there, you can get a very nice cut, even across end grain. The problem is it only lasts about 45 seconds in the spot. So, you can argue there's a lot of different spots as you go around that, but it's gone in a flash, actually. Once the burr's gone, then the tool's not cutting as sharply. And so you'll experience more tear out rather. Okay? Sure.
Oh, the rectangular stone that you put on the circular stone
Sure.
was not to true it, but to
No.
make the grit, give it
Yeah.
the grit.
That's right. It sets the grit. Now, to true this stone, they sell you a little diamond studded tool, and this bar goes up in the vertical position, and you slide it on and it locks to the side, and then you have this wheel here that you turn, and it dresses the wheel. It moves this diamond across the wheel. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the big disadvantages to stones. If you dress a wheel and you take a 64th inch off of the front of the wheel, how much have you reduced the diameter of your stone in total?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Dress your stone 32 times, how much have you reduced the diameter of your wheel? An inch. That means that you are constantly adjusting the length of this piece, or if you're a Wolverine user, you're constantly adjusting this depth to compensate for it. You have to. If you want to keep, like, if your gouge is 60 degrees, the smaller your stone gets, right? You got to move, got to move, got to move. Right? So that's a big disadvantage to stones as far as I'm concerned. That's one of the great advantages of the new CBN wheels.
Is that diamond?
Yeah, it's a diamond impregnated, all right? This is 80 grit and this is 180 grit, all right?
Dave, on your gouge, it looked like you had a secondary undercut bevel. Any,
Yes, and I'll pass that around here in a second. Like I said, this was what Michael Huslick ground for us when Gene and I bought our tools. And I've been replicating this grind ever since because I fell in love with it. It's really nice to use for spindle turning. Okay? So let me put the handle back on wherever I leave it. Well, I'll
Right there.
just pass it around this way. Okay. Again, this tool's very sharp. Please be careful. And now before I put that on, Michael Huslick likes to knock the shoulder off. The bevel. All right. So he likes to knock
Hold
the shoulder.
still.
Now, it's pretty easy on here. You know, I just simply do that. Now, if you don't want to do it in that form or fashion, there's a simpler way to do this. Let me put it back in the jig real quick. And this works for all the grinders, actually. So let me set my projection. So if you're not happy with just taking your tool and doing it in this form, freehand, especially on this slow speed wheel, what you can do is just simply move this arm in. And you've accomplished the same, yeah, that's right, it's move it in. I wanted to make sure it wasn't move it. You move it in and you can get that secondary grind. So let me go ahead and pass this around. But I truly just find it simplest on this TORMEK to go like that.
What's the purpose of that secondary grind?
Well, so when you're following your tool, right, you're always riding your bevel when you're cutting, or should be riding your bevel. So it just gets that shoulder back out of the way some. The longer this bevel, what happens is this increases the amount of heat and friction with the piece. And it can cause the piece to start vibrating that you're turning. Right? So now your tool starts bouncing on you slightly. So it's just one way of reducing that. When you look at my bowl gouges, you'll see that I really grind the shoulders off of my bowl gouges. And that was something that Liam O'Neill was big on. When we took Liam's workshop, he wanted you to remove the shoulders. And another big advantage of this TORMEK, I mean, they give you these nice little labels so you can set all your settings on it so you always get a consistent grind.
That's vicious.
It's vicious.
Heat causes vibration.
Heat can induce vibration in the wood, yes. It's not boom, boom, boom type vibration, but you know, heat, the wood starts moving on you. It'll heat up in one spot, and that creates where the heat's applied can create a high spot, right? Then you move your tool, gets to a cool spot, so when you come back and forth across, makes sense, all right? Any other questions on the TORMEK? Any of you guys that use one want to say anything about them?
I have a jet just like it, but it takes forever to grind.
That's the one thing I don't like about it. That's the hate part of this machine. If you want to change the grind on the tool, you want to go from, say, 60 degrees the 40 degrees, you're going to spend a couple hours grinding that tool. But once you get there and you want to resharpen it, it's like that. All right? What's that?
Takes a while. Even
It
with
takes,
chisels.
even with chisels, even with planes, right?
Oh, yeah. But once
It's
you
just
do,
the way it is.
sharp as a razor.
Now, this, yeah, there's all kind of jigs for this thing. I mean, here's the jig for doing plane knives or whatever, knives in your planer. It comes with a platform to do your scrapers with. And so it's pretty nice in that regard.
Will that slow speed wet wheel actually put a burr on a scraper?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It will put a burr on the scraper. So anything more on the TORMEK? All right. Using a grinder with stone wheels and using a grinder with C-bend wheels, they're almost identical in use. All right. I've done a lot of reading on the stones to be used. I see we have 2 white stones on the club's grinder. Well, if you ever watch Doug Thompson's video on sharpening, he swears by the blue stones, the Norton 3X K grade blue stones. And you can get those in, I think they come 46 grit and 80 grit. And that's what Doug Thompson recommends. And Doug's probably making some of the finest turning tools out there right now. All right? So we've got 2 soft wheels on the club's grinder. But you can sharpen your tools on these wheels. It'll get the job done. All right? So now I'm going to really come over and talk to these new C-bend wheels that stone wheels. Let's talk a little more about them first. How are they made? Well, they mix up the material, they put it in a mold, they heat it, they cure it, and they pop it out, and there's your stone wheel, right? Stone wheels can be tricky to balance. I mean, most of them come with inserts for the arbor. You know, most arbors on grinders for woodworking are 5/8. But you will typically find when you get a stone wheel, the arbor hole is much greater than that, and they give you these bunch of plastic inserts to fill in the arbor space in. And then what you end up with is you end up with a wheel or a grinder that's vibrating. Right? How many people have experienced that? Right? So you're always fighting that. And then you have to dress these stones, right? And here's a diamond dresser to dress your grinding stone. And again, you know, you take off a 32nd or a 64th, you reduced your wheel. And it's very hard to turn these wheels true with something like this, because the wheel starts out, when it's factory new, it's not perfectly round. And it's not concentric to your arbor, right? And you've got a vibration. So when you go to sharpen this, I mean, you're going to use your platform, right? You're going to set it down, and you're going to take this diamond and you're going to bring it up here. But because it's never true to begin with, this dresser is bouncing slightly. So you never have a true round wheel. I mean, you get very close and, you know, your eye's not going to notice it, but it's just one of those disadvantages to these types of stones. And I haven't run this club grinder, but let's see how it does. Actually, it looks like it's running pretty true. I'm pretty impressed. There's a little vibration to it, but it's not too bad. The other thing I don't like about stones is to stop them quickly, you almost need to take a piece of metal and rub against the stone to bring your wheels to a stop. With these CBN wheels, right? You just put your fingers on the sides are smooth in there. So they do pretty good. Right? So, let's talk about the Wolverine system. Right? So with the Wolverine system, you get these two mounts, and this is probably what I assume most people are using, or most beginners are using, right? And you get this very long V-arm. Okay. And you also get a platform to do scrapers and such. And the other thing, if you're doing gouges or whatever, you should purchase a Varigrind. Now, One Way has come out with a Varigrind 2. And to be frankly honest, I have not read one review where people have said anything good about the new Varigrind 2. So, they still sell the original. Buy the original.
Turn it sideways. So we can see.
Okay?
Thank you.
Buy the original. Now, my advice is, once you purchase this, the very first thing I want you to do is round the tip. Yes, and let me hold up, the clubs hasn't been done. But you can see the clubs, you see how bulky that is? So when you go to use it back here, you got those edges and corners. You're trying to sweep an arc, and you're running over those big edges, right?
Hey, hold the two of them up together
All right.
in the camera.
So there's the way they come, all right? And there's what I recommend you do to it.
Can you guys see that okay?
Can you see that? Is that showing up fine? All right. When you round over those edges, now when you sweep that arc, it's nice and smooth. There's no catch. Okay? The other thing I recommend you to do, let me grab a sheet back here. Doug Thompson, God bless his soul, went the One Way. And One Way agreed as to what angle to set this leg to, because this leg varies all over the place. And what does this leg do? No, it doesn't set the angle. Sets the sweep of how far back your wing's going to come. All right, on your. So let me grab this big guy again. So it's setting this sweep back. All right. And so Doug, and this is the. Oh, I'm sorry, Arnie. I'm sorry.
Hold it up again.
All right. All right. So that leg helps determine the amount of sweep back here. Okay?
Okay.
Now, what Doug has done is he has made a full-size template for us. And so what you need to do is take your Varigrind jig, let me get it oriented correctly, and match that angle. Isn't that pretty nice of him? Finally know how to set that thing, because if you read the One Way instructions that comes with this Varigrind, you will never get that out of there. Right? So, once you have that angle, take a pair of pliers and cinch that thing down. I have read some guys go so far as to weld it in place.
So that's a fixed angle no matter which dugout or?
Doug says that's a fixed angle.
What, can you email that sheet out to everybody?
Yep,
Well, it's
and
on their
I have a
website.
few extra.
It's on Thompson's website, isn't it?
It's on Doug Thompson's website, and it's just thompsonlathetools.com. All right, but I'll send out an email with that so everybody has it. And those of you, anybody bring their Varigrind jig in tonight? We'll set those up for you. Okay. All right. So with those set, now what determines the angle of your grind? What determines the angle? If this is determining how far back your sweep comes, what determines the angle? The V-rod. Okay. That's a little too big.
Would you mind
So-
explaining the sweep back for some of us that are
No,
kind of new?
no. So, obviously, see this sweep back right here? This is a 60-degree grind. Let me pull it over here for Arnie. So this is a 60 degree.
Now, what is
And-
60 degrees?
The nose is 60 degrees. I think the angle varies as you come back on the wings. All right? So, how do we get 60 degrees?
Well, he wanted to know about the sweep back.
Well, that is the sweep back, and I assume that's what you wanted, right? Sweep back or the wing of the cut. Because when you get this on here, what you're doing, Arnie, if you can get the camera down here, is you're sweeping this over, right? And so you're cutting back. You're just not rounding the nose over. Okay? So this is 60.
So Dave, that sweep
Hold on.
back maintains at 60 degrees? Is that?
I don't know if it holds exactly at 60 degrees, but let me show you this one. There's 40 degrees. See how far back we're coming with that?
Rotate it a little bit.
All right, like that.
Hold them side by side.
Good luck. All right, but big difference in the length of where you're coming back and grinding, correct? Now this is a special detail grind, right? I do not recommend beginners starting off with anything that looks like this. Stay away from this. I bought that in for some of the more experienced in the club. So, according to Doug, what you need to do is, if you're going to do 60 degrees, and basically, all the professionals are using a 60-degree grind or something very close to it. Yeah, if it's 55 or 65, it really makes no difference, folks. You're close enough. You're in the ballpark. All right. So Doug recommends a projection of 1 3/4 inches. So on my grinder table here, I have put 2 blocks, and they're at 1 3/4 inches. So I just bring up my Varigrind, set my depth, crank my knob down. Now, how do we get 60 degrees? Remember, 60 degrees is determined by the length of this arm. So, everybody who turns and sharpens should have a Sharpie. Alright? Take your Sharpie, just color over the nose of your gouge. And if it removes all the black, which this did, I know I'm at 60 degrees. I know I'm at 60 degrees because I ground this at 60 degrees. Now the first time you do your tools on your grinder, this is a bit of a pain. If you watch Thompson's video, he's using a combination square, okay? Which he sets to 60 degrees, and I believe I've already got this set to 60 degrees. Actually, no, I don't. So we're measuring 60 degrees from the flute. Alright, so you want to go in there, and bring it up, and you can see I'm right at 60 degrees. In order to get your tool first set to 60 degrees, it's a bit of hit and miss. If you don't know what length you need your V-arm set to, okay? And so it's just, you know, you're going to grind the nose of your tool. You're going to, you'll set your V-arm, you'll grind the nose of your tool, grab your square, do a check. Am I 60 degrees? If not, if you're steeper, I think you want to move your arm out. If you're less than 60, then you want to slide your arm in a little bit. Okay? Now, you don't need to buy a real fancy combination. If you got one of these, that's great. If not, I recommend you go over to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy one of these $15 general protractors, right? Set it to 60 degrees. Instead of $150, you got a $15 tool, and you got 60 degrees. Okay? So, the nice thing about CBN wheels, you never dress them. Therefore, your wheel never reduces in size. Therefore, when you set your arm, you take your Sharpie pen and you come over and you make a mark on your arm, and you can go back to that position every time. If you're using stones, remember, every time you dress your wheel, you're going to have to adjust the length of this arm. And so marking the arm doesn't work so well for you, because every time you make that wheel a little smaller, you got to move this arm in a little more. These wheels here, the club, we did a club buy, we got them for $125 a wheel. Now CBN wheels, when they started off, were a couple $100, so they're really coming down in cost. These aren't the most expensive CBN wheels. As a matter of fact, they're probably the cheapest CBN wheels I've seen. But they work. Actually, who bought CBN? Fred, you bought CBN wheels. How do you like them?
Oh, great.
All right?
I just had a question.
Sure, Dan.
The position for the sweep, where the notches are, is that position the same whether you're doing spindle or bowl gouges?
No. Spindle gouges, general rules of thumb. You know, when it comes to sharpening, there's guys doing all kind of stuff. But in general, what seems to work, at least for beginners, for spindle gouges, 40 degrees. For bowl gouges, 60 degrees.
Okay, not the angle, but the sweep adjustment.
The sweep adjustment,
That's
that's this leg right here. That gives you a nice Ellsworth or
Irish.
Irish grind that Liam actually came up with.
Okay,
All right.
does the sweep adjustment change whether you're using,
When you change the angle right here, if you change this angle right here, where this leg is set, you will change how far you come back this way.
right, but the recommendation on that sheet, is it different for the sweep, is it different whether you're doing a 40-degree spindle gouge or a 60-degree bowl
Nope.
gouge?
For spindle and bowl gouges, he's recommending this leg be set right here, and that's what, crank it down, and that's why some guys weld them into position so they never move.
And that's 40, correct?
Right. What, this angle here is probably close to 45 degrees is what I think,
Looks like it.
right? Because I have some other sharpening jigs, all right? I have a David Ellsworth jig, and I've got a Johannesson Michelson jig. And Johannesson's the hat guy, that's what he's known by, right? So, these angles are 45 degrees. I have a David DeWitt jig. And David DeWitt set this at 45 degrees for me. Why do I have this jig? Because I made a mistake one day, and when I purchased this huge bowl gouge, I thought I was purchasing a 3/4 inch bowl gouge. Well, guess what? In the U.S., we measure bowl gouges to the outer diameter. Europeans and Canadians measure a bowl gouge to the distance between the flutes. This is a British bowl gouge I bought. It's a Robert Shoreby. And so therefore, when I ordered a 3/4 inch bowl gouge, I got a 1 inch wide gouge. It won't fit in any of my other jigs. So I went to Mr. DeWitt, and he made me a nice jig for my 1 inch wide bowl gouge. All right, so I think we're ready to sharpen. Any other questions? All right, I have an 80 grit and a 180 grit. You need to regrind a tool. You go to this 80 grit wheel, buddy, it will remove steel very quickly. So you can go from a 60 degree to a 40 degree grind in minutes and not hours. It'll really take off some steel. Some guys only buy the 80 grit. They find that the 80 grit, when they do their grind, it's sharp enough for them to turn with. I do most of my grind, now that I got my tools ground, I do most of mine on the 180. It stresses up the tool real quick once you're there. So, all right. And I can see it was off just slightly on my grind. But that's really good. Now, when you grind with these CBN wheels, it's really important when you come to the nose. Let me stop this. It's a lot faster than waiting for the stones. If Arnie can get the camera down here. You really don't want to hesitate when you come off the nose. If you hesitate, you're going to get a bird's beak.
That's why taking the handle off is so important. You gotta
That's
have
why
the
taking the
you can't
handle off.
swing
You
it
get that
around.
handle out of the way because, man, you could see. Well, if I had the handle on this tool, now I've got to stand way back here to swing my tool. So there's a recommendation: buy tools where you can remove handles. It just makes it simple to sharpen. But you can sharpen with the handle on, don't get me wrong. It just makes it a more tedious affair because now you've got to work with that handle in the way, right? So, that's not the prettiest grind because I missed a little bit, but I'll send that around. We finished with that one?
Yep.
So here's some other tools, getting back to the TORMEK. I mean, I sharpen all my spindle gouges on the TORMEK because I never really ever changed the angle. So if you want to take a look at those grinds, and now these are spindle gouges here. So now today I purposely ground this tool so that I would have a dip on one side. Now this is getting back to a 40-degree grind. And this is using the Johannes Mikkelsen method of grinding. And I'll show you that here in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and pass this around. You will notice that I've got a very straight edge on. If you hold the gouge so it's pointing away from you, on the left-hand side is a very straight edge, okay? On the right side, and hopefully this is going to show up in the camera, I held it and I ground a dip. You do not want dips. But I just did this one so you guys can see what a dip looks like, okay? If you have a dip, the tool's going to grab, okay? So, before we get into some of the other stuff, talk about Liam O'Neill just a little bit more. Liam says, you know all these jigs you guys use? Actually, I can use that one. They're all training wheels. All these sharpening jigs are nothing but training wheels. And to sharpen your tools, all you need is this platform. Rotate it up into a position about like that. Slide it up like that so you got enough clearance. And I think I got everything. Well, I'll grab this big one. And learn to sharpen like this. Right? Just use the top of your platform. Now, if you took the workshop with Liam and you saw his tools, his grinds, he had so many facets around his tool, you would say to yourself, how does anybody turn with such a tool? Because, you know, we're all trying to get this perfect grind. We're all trying to get that perfect grind. But boy, Liam's tools, some of the ugliest I've ever seen, to be frankly honest. Right? But the guy can cut with them like he's cutting wood, you know, a knife to butter. It's just as amazing. But, and he says that, you know, when you become a real professional, you stop worrying about all that stuff. You just use your platform. Sweep around. So I'll go ahead and send this big gouge around too. Now, on this gouge here, you will see I did a secondary bevel, just to knock the shoulder off. But that's a pretty nicely ground tool. For those that are a little more advanced, you know, one of the things about this club, we have from beginners to those who have been at it a while. So this is something that's for those who've been at it a while. This 40-degree grind, when you are hogging out the interior of a bowl, does an excellent job, because when you're using a 60-degree grind, when you're going into the bowl, you are doing a push cut and you're sweeping around the bottom of the bowl. And when you sweep, what you're doing is you are cutting the end grain more, right? You're not getting so much of a shear cut, you're getting more of a scraping action across the end grain. And so you'll see when you get into the bottom of your bowls, you'll start experiencing a lot of tear out, right? We've all seen that or suffered that problem.
Dave, what's the orientation of your wood when you're doing that, especially for the beginners?
Well,
Is it
we're flat grain, right? We're doing a regular bowl blank, right? We're flat grain. We're not doing a between center or end grain cutting, right? We're flat grain when we're doing a bowl. When I say bowl, think flat grain. And so when you come around, it's more of a scraping action, even though you're using that gouge. Now, with this grind, what you're able to do is to go pretty much straight in. So now you're getting more of a shear cut on that end grain, and it's reducing the amount of tear out. This is not a grind for a beginner. Can I say that one more time? If you're a beginner, don't do this grind. Get some experience under your belt first, right? But to get this grind, you need to, this is a grind that Johannes Michelson uses, all right? And he sells this jig. It's the only place you can get it. And he calls it the Victor jig. And if you take a look, if Horny can capture it, we've got various pivot points. We got 2 out here, and we got 3 running up the center. Can you see those? All right. This is going to be a bit of a problem for Arnie. I can tell right now. But he sells, this is another part of the system that comes with, right? And so what you do, he also sells this block down here. Can you capture this block down here, Arnie? And so this one actually goes on upside down from the other fixtures or jigs that you use. And this block down here has a pin in it. So that pin has to go into the flute, right? So you slide up. Whoops, I got it upside down. Hold on. I'm getting there, guys. There we go. So you bring your gouge up, flute down, slide this fixture up until it hits that pin. Then set your fixture. So how does he accomplish? I mean, this is really exaggerated. If you did a 40-degree grind using the Vera grind, you're not coming this far back with your wings. All right? You start off on the right side or the left side, and you grind like this. Again, as with all the other jigs in sharpening, you need to start off at center and set the depth of your arm, right? Now, I've done that previously, but it's the same drill as when we use the Varigrind. You know, you grind a little bit, you measure the angle, you adjust the depth of this arm, of the platform. Once you got that, then you can come off to the side. And you sort of start here, rotate over, and go around the nose. Start here, rotate over, go around the nose. You switch to the other pivot point. Start here, round over the nose. Come back here, round over the nose. Until you get the grind you want. Now, Michelson likes to do not only a secondary, but a tertiary grind to get rid of the shoulders. Okay? So, don't use the back center. So what you do is you come up to the second pivot point, and you grind again. That creates your secondary grind. Then you move finally up to the third pivot point. And now you really only need to do the tip. You don't want to go way back around with that grind. You really don't need to. You know, there's a lot of guys argue, do you ever really need a tertiary grind? Well, I know what Lanham O'Neill's opinion was. He thought it was a waste of time. But that's Johanna Michelson's grind.
Do you
Now,
grind the bottom of that jig like you do with the other ones? The actual jig that pivots,
The point.
the part that pivots, you grind that also?
The point,
no, this already comes. This, the David's Ellsworth is already rounded off, right? They're all, and these are made to use, David Ellsworth is made to use with the V-arm of the Wolverine system. Okay, so he's already rounded it off. Dave DeWitt did that for me when he made this jig for me. It's rounded off, so now you get a nice sweeping motion without any real rocking in it. All right? So, please be very careful with this as I pass it around. This is also a great scraping grind when you want to do a shear cut on the outside of your bowls to remove any tear out. You got very long wings coming back here. Now I probably went a little too far when I ground this. I have a very flat grind coming back. All right? And I'm glad I didn't go any farther because then I would have had dips. So this is the extreme where you want to stop. Actually, this should be crowned just slightly. I don't have a crown. Any questions? Because we want to turn this over into a hands-on for those who bought some of your tools in the Sharpening. I'd like to get to that. It's already 9 o'clock. All right. Guess we'll call that a wrap, and thanks for listening, folks.